rain hammers a valley, the railroad forgot hills, folding around a dead town like closed hands. Down where the track ends in weeds, 60 feet of rusted iron sits waiting, and under 30 years of grime, 14 stained glass windows catch the stormlight and glow like something alive. Closer now, a locking bar fused solid, a welded seam no one questioned, a whole town that agreed without ever saying it out loud to never look inside. Then through the wet grass footsteps, a duffel bag, a hand young knuckles split pressing flat against the cold metal. The bar groans, rust rains down. Somewhere in town, an old man goes quiet mid-sentence. A shopkeeper locks her register. A phone gets picked up and a man with a silver smile listens and stops smiling because the door is opening, inch by screaming inch, and inside a candle sits burned halfway down, a table set for two, still waiting. Some doors stay shut for 30 years because of rust, and some stay shut because a whole town decided quietly, without ever taking a vote, that whatever waited behind them should never see daylight again. This is the story of a door that was both. It begins with a hand, a young woman's hand, 21 years old, knuckles split and bleeding a little pressed flat against cold iron in the gray light of an October afternoon. The hand is shaking, not from the cold, from something older than cold. Behind that door, nothing has moved since before she was born. Behind that door, a table is still set for a dinner that never happened. Behind that door, a clock stopped at exactly 6:15 and never found the heart to start again. But she doesn't know that yet. To understand why Junie Faulkner is standing in the weeds at the edge of a dead-end town with her palm against a rail car the whole county laughed at, you have to go back 2 days, back to the rain, back to the bus, back to $19 folded into a sock, and a postcard so old the ink had faded to the color of weak tea. So, let's go back. The bus broke down 4 miles outside Garnet Hollow on a Tuesday, and Junie Faulkner took it personally, because of course it did. Of course, the one bus heading toward the one warehouse job 2 counties over would cough, shudder, and die on a state route in the middle of the hills, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the exact week. She had exactly $19 to her name. That was how her luck ran. Always had. Her whole life felt like a bus that quit 4 miles short of somewhere better. The driver figured 3 hours for a replacement, maybe 4. Junie looked at the rain coming over the ridge. She looked at the gravel road curling down toward a cluster of rooftops in the valley, and she did what she always did when waiting felt worse than walking. She walked. 21 years old, 1 duffel bag with 2 shirts and a toothbrush, a phone with a crack across the screen shaped like a river on a map, and a shoebox. Always the shoebox wrapped in a plastic grocery bag tucked in the bottom of the duffel where rain couldn't reach it. Inside the shoebox were her mother's letters, 14 of them, sealed, never opened. Her mother had written them in the last year of her life in the hospice with the yellow curtains, and Junie had been 11, and a woman from the county had handed her the box afterward, along with a garbage bag of her own clothes, and that was that. Foster home number 1, then 2, then 5, then a group home, then a couch, then a bus station bench in October, where she taught herself to sleep sitting upright, so nobody would guess she had no place left to be. She never opened the letters. Don't think about the letters. She wasn't thinking about the letters. There was one other thing in that shoebox, a postcard, older than the letters, a faded photograph of a railroad depot on the front and on the back in handwriting that leaned hard to the right, like it was walking into wind, just 11 words. Some things are worth waiting for, baby girl. Even me. M. M for Mavis. Mavis Faulkner, a grandmother Junie had never met, a name her mother spoke exactly twice, both times, near the end, both times with the look of a woman pressing on a bruise to see if it still hurt. The postmark on the card had worn away to a ghost, just a smudge where a town's name used to be. Junie had spent years squinting at that smudge under different lights, tilting it beneath lamps and windows, willing the letters to come back. They never did. So she carried it, the way some people carry a saint's medal, not because it worked, because setting it down felt like quitting on something she couldn't name. She counted things when she got nervous, a habit from the group home from a counselor with kind eyes and a nervous laugh who told her when the world gets too big, make it small. Count what's in front of you. So Junie counted. Fence posts along the gravel road, 31. Crows on a power line, 6. Dollars in her sock, 19. It's fine, she told herself. It was not fine, it's fine. The rain caught her at the edge of town. Garnet Hollow, said the sign, though half the letters had peeled, so really it said G-A-R-T Hollow, which felt about right. Population somewhere under 3,000. The kind of town the railroad built and the railroad abandoned, leaving behind a main street with more memory than commerce, a hardware store, a diner with a hand-painted sign shaped like a spoon, a post office, a church with a bell that Junie would learn rang a half-second flat every Sunday and had for 40 years, and at the far end a long, low building with its lights on and its doors open and a sound coming out of it she hadn't heard in a while. People, a lot of people, warm and in one room. County auction today, said the paper taped to the glass. Now understand something about Junie Faulkner. A girl with $19 does not walk into an auction house to shop. She walks in because the chairs cost nothing, the furnace is generous, and nobody in the back row asks a quiet stranger to show a ticket. She'd worked that out in 3 different towns already. Libraries, church basements, auction halls, the unofficial living rooms of people who don't have one. So she went in, soaked to the shoulders, dripping on the concrete. She took a seat in the last row, pulled the duffel onto her lap like a shield, and let the heat work into her bones, while a wiry auctioneer up front rattled through lots, like a man reading a grocery list he'd read 1,000 times. His name, she'd learn later, was Deke Wooten, 30 years calling sales in that county. He knew to the syllable which lots would start a war and which were dead weight nobody wanted. That afternoon ran heavy on dead weight, a foreclosed garage full of tires, 2 acres of swampy bottomland that made the front row groan out loud, a stack of storage units, contents unknown, which drew a brief flurry from the treasure hunters and then died on the vine. Junie half listened. Mostly she counted ceiling tiles, 42 plus 1 water stain shaped like Ohio. Then Deke Wooten shuffled his papers, and something in his voice changed, went a little dry, a little amused, the voice of a man about to tell a joke the whole room already knows. Lot 41. Half the room laughed before he read another word. 1 railcar, abandoned, sitting on a strip of tax-forfeited spur land out behind Tanner Road. County took the parcel 11 years back. Liens cleared, no buyers since. And folks, I do mean no buyers. A pause, a dry little smile. Sold as is. Where is? Car and land together. Opening bid $4. Nobody moved. A big man in the third row muttered that the thing had been rusted shut since before his daughter was born. A woman near the aisle allowed that the county ought to pay somebody to haul it off, not the other way around. Somebody else said a word Junie didn't catch, and three people around him laughed the kind of laugh that has a story buried under it, and a fourth person didn't laugh at all. That was the part Junie noticed. An older woman by the window, arms crossed, mouth pressed into a line like a sealed envelope. Deke went, sing-song playing to the crowd. $4 for your very own piece of railroad history. Nobody, not one soul. He'd sold haunted houses faster than this. And Junie Faulkner, 21 years old, $19 to her name, raised her hand. She would spend years trying to explain why. She never fully managed it. Maybe it was the words as is, where is, which sounded to a girl who'd been inspected and evaluated and placed her whole life like the first thing anyone had ever offered her, without conditions attached. Maybe it was the rain. Maybe it was the postcard in her shoebox with a smudge where a town used to be. Maybe she was simply tired, bone-tired soul, tired of being the one thing in every room that nobody would bid on. Her hand went up, 2 fingers the way she'd seen on television. $4. The hall held its breath. Not long, 1 beat, long enough for every head to turn and find the soaked girl in the back row with a duffel on her lap and rainwater still tracking off her chin. Deke Wooten didn't give them time to decide whether to laugh. The gavel came down like a door slamming. Sold. Young lady in the back. $4. Lot 41. And then softer, almost to himself, with a look on his face Junie couldn't read, he added 2 words, Lord help you, which should have been her first clue. She paid at a folding table by the exit. 4 ones, smooth, flat, still damp. The clerk, a round-faced man who kept glancing at her like she might be a prank somebody was playing on him, slid across a receipt and a slip of paper with a location scrawled on it. Spur track, end of Tanner Road, half-mile past the old crossing. Junie asked if that was all. That was all. Then he hesitated, looked left, looked right. His voice dropped like the words might carry. Did she know what she'd bought? Did she know whose it was? Behind him, an older man in a feed cap spoke without looking up from his newspaper. Leave it, Marv. Not unkind. Not a suggestion either. Marv left it, and Junie walked out of the auction house into the thinning rain, owning something for the first time in her entire life. It might not open. It might be a rust-eaten shell full of raccoons and regret, but it was hers, and no caseworker, no placement form, no shelter intake sheet, no tired woman with a clipboard could take it, reassign it, or decide it would be better off somewhere else. She stood on the sidewalk and cried for about 11 seconds. Then she counted the streetlights on Main. 9. And she stopped because 11 seconds was all she ever gave it, and went looking for somewhere dry to sleep. She found the Railcar the next morning, and here is the thing nobody at that auction had bothered to mention. Here is the thing that stopped Junie Faulkner dead in the wet grass at the end of Tanner Road, with her breath hanging white in the cold. It wasn't a boxcar. She'd pictured a boxcar. Everybody pictures a boxcar, a big rusted rectangle plain as a shoe. What sat crooked on that dead-end spur, sunk to its ankles in 30 years of weeds and wild sumac, was another animal entirely. Long, low-slung, elegant, the way a shipwreck is elegant. A Pullman car, or it had been once, with a raised center roofline running its whole length like a spine, and set into that raised section down both sides a row of small arched windows, stained glass windows, filthy, furred with grime. But when the morning sun broke through behind her, the light caught those little arched panes, and something happened inside the dirt. A glow, deep red, bottle green, a gold like the last minute of a sunset. Only a moment, like the car had opened its eyes to look at her. Junie stood in the weeds with her $4 receipt in her pocket and thought, "What are you?" She walked its length, 60 feet give or take. The paint had weathered to a color that couldn't choose between green and gray. Faint lettering ghosted along the side, too far gone to read, only the suggestion of words the way a gravestone forgets its own name. Both sliding doors were sealed, and the locking bars lay buried under rust, so thick it had stopped looking like decay. It looked grown, like coral, like the car had spent 3 decades building itself a suit of armor. There was one more thing, stenciled on the door, still faintly legible, a single word that meant nothing to her yet. Paymaster. She didn't know what a paymaster's car was, didn't know that once this car had rolled through these hills every other Friday with a safe full of wages and a clerk with a ledger paying the men who kept the line alive. Didn't know the railroad had given it windows of colored glass on purpose because the car that carried the money ought to look like a promise. She just knew the roof looked sound, and that mattered more than history because the temperature was due to drop that night, and a girl with $15 left runs that arithmetic automatically. Roof, walls, wind, survivable. All she had to do was get inside. She hauled on the locking bar until her palm split open. It did not move, not an inch, not a hair. She found a length of pipe in the weeds and rigged it as a lever, braced her boot against the wheel housing, and threw her whole rain-soaked weight against it. The pipe bent. The pipe bent. The bar didn't even sigh. She hammered the rust with a rock until orange flakes snowed over her wrists. She tried the second door. Same. She climbed the 3 iron steps to the small end door at the back. Sealed. Welded, actually a neat bead of it under the corrosion, though the strangeness of that wouldn't land on her for days. Who welds a door shut on a car full of nothing? By afternoon, her hands looked like she'd lost an argument with a cheese grater. The drizzle had crept back thin and cold and personal, and Junie sat down in the gravel with her spine against 60 feet of useless iron and ate the last granola bar in her duffel in 4 bites. She stretched across 20 minutes. She considered walking into town to borrow a crowbar. Then she considered how that conversation would run. A stranger, no address, no last name anybody knew. Hello, may I borrow tools to break into a railcar? Even though it was hers, even though she had the receipt. 21 years in the system had taught her precisely how fast a girl like her went from owner to suspect, and the answer was roughly the length of 1 phone call. So she kept at it alone until the light failed, until her shoulders burned, until she sank down in the gravel beside her $4 rail car, knees pulled to her chest, more from habit than cold, and stared at that locked door the way she had stared at 100 doors before it. One more thing shut against her, one more decision made about her somewhere out of sight by nobody who'd thought to ask. It's fine, she told the door. The door had nothing to say. Doors were like that. Town happened to her the next morning the way small towns do. She'd slept badly under the car's overhang, wrapped in everything she owned, and walked into Garnet Hollow at first light because the diner window promised bottomless coffee, $1.50, which was in her professional opinion the finest sentence in the English language. The diner was called the Lucky Spoon. Behind the counter stood a woman in her 60s, built like the word no, silver hair, pinned up in a bun, that had plainly won every argument it had ever entered, and eyes that took Junie's full inventory in a single pass: the wet duffel, the split knuckles, the way she stood half-turned toward the exit, always like every room might require leaving in a hurry. Booth by the heater, not a question, not a suggestion. Junie sat in the booth by the heater. Coffee appeared. 90 seconds later, a plate appeared. Eggs, toast, hash browns leaning against the eggs like old friends. Junie stared at it and pointed out that she hadn't ordered. Kitchen made extra. The woman was already moving, already refilling somebody's cup, down the line, conducting the whole room like an orchestra. Comes with the booth. I can't. Eat first, argue after. A beat thrown over her shoulder without turning. Nobody's ever won the argue part, sugar. You're welcome to be the first. That was Bertie Malone. Junie learned the name off the checks, off the regulars, off the way half the town pronounced it like a title. And Junie, who kept a strict policy against charity, who had walked past soup kitchens on an empty stomach out of pure mule-headed pride, cleaned that plate to the shine. Because Bertie had managed the impossible. She'd made it not charity. She'd made it a property of the furniture. And nobody argues with furniture. The whispers started before the toast was gone. She felt them before she heard them. That prickle at the back of the neck. Two men in feed caps at the counter, talking low, glancing over. A woman with a church face by the window, not glancing, which was somehow worse. Words drifted in fragments through the heater fan. Bought the thing. $4. Out behind Tanner Road. That car. You know the one. 30 years. You'd think folks would let it lie. And running underneath it all twice, 3 times a name. Said low. Said the way you say a name you were told as a child not to say. Junie couldn't catch it clean. Only its shape. 2 syllables, then 3. A woman's name she felt sure, though she couldn't have said why. She paid her $1.50. Bertie took it without comment, which felt like passing some kind of exam, and at the register, the older woman gave her one long, unhurried look and offered the first sentence anyone in Garnet Hollow had spent on her that wasn't about food or money. You sleeping out there? Junie's spine straightened on its own. It's fine. Bertie counted change. Junie hadn't asked for into her palm. You know what my mama used to say about fine is help me wearing a voice too proud to say it. The register snapped shut. Pie's half price after 8, case your fine gets hungry. Junie made the rounds that morning, and the town made its rounds of her. The post office first, where she asked casually, so very casually, whether anybody could still tell where a card had been mailed from 30-some years back, if the postmark had faded. The postmaster, a gentle balding man, said no such records existed. Sorry, but offered one thing for free. The old depot cancellation stamp had a flaw in it, a broken curve in the G. Folks used to joke about it. If her card carried that mark, she'd have her answer. Junie's heart performed something complicated. The smudge on her postcard was a smudge, but she thanked him and filed broken G in the fireproof part of her memory. Then the hardware store, because pride was one thing and a bar of fused rust was another, and she'd resolved to spend 3 of her remaining dollars on the cheapest penetrating oil in the county. The hardware store belonged to a rail-thin woman in her 70s with reading glasses on a chain and a cardigan the color of strong mustard. Lorna Pettis said the frame licensed by the register. She found Junie the oil, rang it up, and then counting out the change, she stopped. Her eyes rose over the reading glasses like a searchlight clearing a wall. "You're the one staying out at the Paymaster car?" Not a question. Nothing in this town, Junie was learning, ever was. "It's mine. I bought it." "So I hear. $4. Lorna laid the change on the counter and kept 2 fingers on it, pinning the coins, pinning the moment. She was going to say something for free, she announced, which was not a habit of hers. "So listen." She leaned in an inch. Her voice dropped into the register people reserve for churches and hospitals. "If Junie got that car open, and that was a considerable if, she should be real careful what she went digging up in there. That car belonged to somebody this town had spent 30 years agreeing to forget. And some folks around here." A pause. The reading glasses came off. "Some folks would rather that name stay dead and buried under all that rust." Did she understand? No, Junie said honestly. "Good." The change released. The searchlight switched off. The shopkeeper returned. "Keep it that way and you'll sleep easier. Want a bag for that oil." Junie walked back out Tanner Road with a $3 can of oil, $12 to her name, and a head full of questions, shaped like a name she couldn't hear. For the rest of that week, Garnet Hollow watched her, the way a pond watches a stone that hasn't been thrown yet. The postmaster nodded when she passed and then studied her back through the window. 2 boys on bicycles made 3 slow loops past the spur, wobbling with the effort of pretending not to look. At the church, the flat bell rang. Sunday morning, and Junie walking by on the far sidewalk felt more eyes than a girl carrying laundry soap had any right to collect. Nobody was unkind. Nobody was warm either. The town was holding her at arm's length while it decided what she was. She knew the feeling. She'd been held at arm's length by experts. Day 2 at the door went worse than day 1, which she had not believed possible. The oil accomplished exactly nothing at first. She soaked the bar, waited the way the label preached, soaked it again, hammered, levered, pleaded. At one point, and she was not proud of it, she kicked the door flat-footed and yelled at it, actually yelled, her voice cracking across the empty spur. She owned it. She had a receipt. The car did not care about her receipt. By late afternoon, her arms were spent. The split knuckles had re-split, and something in her chest had started the thing she hated most. The math, the old math, $12 no bed, a piece of iron, nobody could open, winter incoming. The math that always finished in the same room, an office, a desk. The word she would rather freeze than say out loud. "I need help." She sat in the gravel, pulled her knees up. She was counting the rivets on the door, 40, 41, 42, when she heard the truck. An old pickup, more primer than paint, easing to a stop on Tanner Road. The engine ticked itself quiet. A door creaked, and a man came through the weeds toward her at a pace that said he had never hurried once in his life, and it had worked out fine. 70-something, tall but folded slightly at the shoulders the way tall men fold after 50 years bent over engines. Hands like tree roots. He stopped 10 feet off outside her space and studied the car a long while before he studied her. The bent pipe in the grass, the rock, the chewed rust around the locking bar, her hands. "You're the one who bought it." Same words as everyone, same absence of a question mark. $4. She heard the exhaustion in her own voice, still not sure who got robbed. Something shifted at the corner of the old man's mouth. Not a smile. A relative of one. He came closer, unhurried, and laid one huge hand flat against the locking bar, the way a veterinarian lays a hand on a horse, just resting, listening through the palm. I gave his name to the door more than to her. Amos Greeley. He'd fixed diesels for the line back when there was a line. 20-some years of it. His thumb moved across the rust like a man reading Braille. Rust doesn't argue, he told her. It just waits. Wins every fight the same way. Patience. A glance at the bent pipe. She'd gone at it angry, and iron loves angry. Eats it for breakfast. Then, eyes still on the bar, he asked if she was planning on sleeping in there, if I can get it open. And here is what Amos Greeley did not do, and Junie registered it, the way you register warmth after long cold. He did not ask why a 21-year-old girl had nowhere better to sleep than a dead rail car. Did not ask where her people were. He had reached the age where a man can read an entire history off a person's shoulders and find no cause to make her recite it. Whatever the answers were, she had clearly given them too many times already to too many people holding forms. He just walked back to his truck, returned with a breaker bar as long as Junie's leg, a dead blow hammer, and a dented can of penetrating oil, so old the brand had gone extinct. Her can, he observed, nodding at it, was water with a smell. His was the real medicine, older than she was. He shook it and it sloshed like a promise. Then he laid out the terms. They do this the way iron respects. Slow. She'd soak. He'd tap. And neither of them was going to lose their temper. Deal. It took them the better part of an hour of oil creeping into seams that hadn't drunk anything but rainwater since before Junie existed. An hour of the hammer going tick, tick, tick along the bar, patient as a clock. Amos murmuring to the metal under his breath like it was a stubborn patient of long acquaintance. An hour of working the lever one fraction of an inch, then back, then forward a fraction more, her arms alongside his, their breath fogging together in the cooling air, and then a sound, deep in the mechanism, a grinding, groaning, giving sound, like something clearing its throat after 30 years of silence. Amos went still. There she is, he breathed. Now, together, easy. They leaned. The bar moved. 2 inches, 6. The lock rotated in a shriek of orange dust, and the great sliding door, the door half a county, had laughed at the door that had outlasted marriages and mayors, and the railroad itself screamed open along its track, 1 foot, 2, 3, the sound tearing down the empty spur and scattering crows out of the sumac. Then silence, and out of that dark opening rolled a smell that stopped both of them breathing. Not rot, that was the thing. Not mildew, not animal, not decay, none of the smells 30 abandoned years are supposed to manufacture. What rolled out of that car was dust and old paper and lamp oil, and beneath it all, faint as memory, something nearly sweet, cold tea, dried flowers, the smell of a room where a woman had lived carefully, as if the inside of that car had been sealed away, not from weather, from time. Amos clicked on his flashlight. The beam went in through the doorway, and what it found made a 73-year-old man who had watched engines burn and floods take bridges go absolutely perfectly still. Junie looked past him, her lips parted. Nothing came out, because everyone in Garnet Hollow knew the story, had always known it, the way a town knows things without checking. The woman had cleaned that car out the night she ran, taken everything worth carrying and vanished with it. The car was supposed to be a shell, empty as a pulled tooth. The flashlight said otherwise. The flashlight moved trembling faintly down a long, narrow room where somebody had simply stood up, one evening stepped out and never ever come back. A fold-down table near the far wall, set for dinner, for two. Two plates white, enamel with blue rims laid opposite each other. Two cups, two forks, two knives arranged with the kind of care that means company is coming, real company, the kind you set the table early for. A candle in a brass holder between the plates, burned a third down and then out its last drip of wax, frozen mid-fall. A serving dish at the center, with its lid still on, still on. 30 years and no one had ever lifted that lid to learn what waited underneath. The flashlight kept moving because neither of them could manage words. A narrow bed against one wall, made with military precision, wool blanket tucked so tight a coin would have bounced, waiting for someone who fully expected to sleep in it that same night. A row of dresses hanging from a wooden rod, gray with dust, but hanging straight, patient like a choir, waiting for the first note. A shelf of books, a sewing basket needle still parked in its spool of thread, a small cast-iron stove kettle sitting ready on the plate, and along one whole wall a desk, not a home desk, a working desk, pigeonholes stuffed with papers, ledger books stacked in columns straight as soldiers, an adding machine under a fitted cover, everything squared, everything aligned, everything arranged by a mind Junie recognized instantly down in her counting, ordering, nervous bones, because it was a mind like her own, a mind that made the world small so the world couldn't hurt as much. Dust lay over all of it in one fine, even unbroken gray fall, laid down season after season with no one to disturb it, until the stillness itself had a color and a texture and very nearly a sound. Not one footprint, not one fingerprint. 30 years of quiet so complete it pressed against the ears. Lord above. Amos's voice came out at half its size. The beam had stopped on the far wall above the desk, and it was shaking now, honestly, shaking in the hand of a man whose hands did not shake. It's all still here. He said it the way a man says something he is only half prepared to believe, and there was a note underneath the wonder that Junie heard without understanding a note she would not understand for weeks. Something heavier than surprise, something that sounded almost like a debt being called in. The flashlight climbed the wall above the desk and found the clock, a fine old railroad regulator, octagon-faced brass pendulum hanging dead behind dusty glass. Hands stopped, frozen, fixed. 6:15. Junie stepped up into the car, slowly. The way you enter a church that isn't your church hat already in your hands. The floorboard spoke under her boots, first voices they'd used in 3 decades, and her breath stirred the dust in the flashlight beam until it swirled like something waking. She stood in the middle of a stranger's whole careful life, in the smell of paper and lamp oil and faded sweetness, and felt something she had no word for yet. Not fear. It should have been fear, a dinner table laid for ghosts, and it wasn't. It was recognition. Somebody had made this. Somebody with nothing but a railcar had folded and tucked and squared and shelved until it became a home. Somebody had set a table for 2, which meant somebody had been waiting for someone, hoping, and the tight blanket and the parked needle and the covered dish all said the same quiet, devastating thing. Whoever she was, she believed she was coming back. Junie had bought a place to sleep, standing in the beam of Amos Greeley's flashlight, $12 in her sock and dust, settling on her shoulders like a welcome. She began to understand she might have bought something else entirely. She slept that first night on the floor, not the bed, couldn't bring herself to touch the bed. It wasn't hers. It was so fiercely, evidently, somebody's blanket tucked and waiting, that lying in it would have felt like wearing a stranger's wedding ring. So she spread her own thin blanket on the boards in the middle of the long room and lay listening to the wind hunt the seams of the old car, and the old car, 60 feet of iron and stained glass, held that wind off her the whole night through. First roof of her own, ever. She cried for 11 seconds, counted the arched windows overhead until she could pick them out against the dark. 14, 7 aside, and slept harder than she had in 2 years. She did not lift the lid on the serving dish. Some doors open with a breaker bar. Some you have to earn. Word moved through Garnet Hollow faster than she'd have believed a town without a newspaper could move it. By the next afternoon, when she came in for her $1.50 coffee, the Lucky Spoon quieted in layers conversation, dropping shelf by shelf until the only sounds left were the heater fan and Bertie's spatula. Everyone knew the girl got it open. The girl got inside. 30 years and a girl with $12 did it in 2 days. Bertie set down the coffee, then sat down across from her, which she had never done, which, judging by 3 sets of raised eyebrows along the counter, she never did for anyone. She folded her hands. Was it true about the table? Set for 2. Junie watched something cross the older woman's face like weather. Who was she? Who says it's a she? The dresses do. A long look. Then Bertie rose, came back with a slab of pie nobody had ordered, set it down like punctuation and dropped her voice. Eat that, and don't ask that question loud in this room, sugar. Not until you know which tables you're sitting near. But the town answered anyway. Towns always do. Not out loud, not to her face. In fragments. In the post office line. Outside the hardware store. That name again, low, 2 syllables, and then 3 passed hand to hand like something that might stain. And, traveling with the name a word, Junie heard the word before she ever heard the name clean. Thief. That's the payroll car, don't you know? That's where the money slept. And she, and her, well, you know what she did. Junie found the truth of it that evening. Alone, in the amber light falling through 14 dusty stained glass windows, kneeling in the corner by the 2 leather suitcases she'd been circling for a day and a half, buckles gone green with age. Her hands shook a little. She told them it was fine. They didn't believe her either. The first case held clothes, a woman's clothes folded with origami care, a good wool coat, gloves, a scarf that had been mended in stitches so small you'd need young eyes and a window's worth of light to find them. And Junie knew mending, and Junie knew what stitches like that cost. The second case held a life. Photographs, a Bible with a family page carrying only one name, letters bundled in ribbon, a cigar box of small treasures, a thimble, a theater ticket, a pressed flower gone to brown lace, and on top of it all, face up, waiting 30 years with the patience of iron, an identification card, railroad issue, official. The photograph showed a woman of maybe 50, sharp-eyed, chin-up mouth, set in a line that said, "Try me." A name sat typed beside the photo, the name the town whispered, the name the rust had been guarding. Opal Deverell, Office of the Paymaster, Garnet Hollow Division. Junie sat back on her heels. Opal Deverell. So that was her. That was the thief. The woman who, if you trusted a diner's worth of whispers, had vanished 30 years ago with the workers' payroll and left this town holding an empty envelope and a grudge it never once set down. Except, Junie looked around the car, at the table set for 2, at the mended scarf, at the tucked blanket, at a ledger-straight desk kept by ledger-straight hands, and her whole body, every instinct honed across 21 years of reading rooms and reading adults and knowing fast who was safe and who was lying, answered the whispers with one word: no. Thieves run with both suitcases. Thieves don't set the table first. She was still holding the ID card when the light through the west window shifted, gold sliding along the wall of pinned photographs above the desk, and Junie stood to look at them properly for the first time. Rail workers in overalls, a crew posed proud on an engine, a church picnic, Opal again and again, always a half step apart, always regarding the camera like it owed her money. Then the light reached the final photograph, pinned at the row's end, hanging slightly crooked, the only crooked thing in the entire car. Two women, arm in arm on the depot platform, laughing heads tipped together, caught mid-joke by somebody who loved them. Opal on the left, and the woman on the right. Junie stopped breathing because she knew that face. Knew it the way you know a face you've studied in bad light for 10 years. The tilt of the smile, the stubborn jaw, the eyes that were, oh God, her mother's eyes, her own eyes looking back at her out of a 30-year-old photograph in a rail car at the end of the world. Her duffel sat 3 feet away. Her hands retrieved the shoebox without asking permission. Grocery bag, lid, the postcard, its corners gone soft as cloth. She held it up beside the pinned photograph with both hands because one hand alone shook too hard. The depot on the postcard, the platform behind the laughing women, same roof line, same sign, same broken lamp on the same iron post, same place, this place. She turned the card over. Some things are worth waiting for, baby girl, even me, M. And there in the corner, in the smudged ghost of a postmark she had tilted under 100 lamps in 100 rooms, now knowing what to hunt for, she finally saw it. The circle of the stamp, the letters around its rim, AG with a broken curve. The postmaster's voice came back to her. The old depot stamp had a flaw. Folks used to joke about it. Mailed from here. Her grandmother's postcard had been mailed from here. Junie's legs sat her down on the floor of Opal Deverell's rail car without consulting the rest of her. Dust rose softly around her, glowing in the last stained glass light, red and green and gold, and somewhere on that wall, 2 women went on laughing on a platform that no longer existed, and Junie Faulkner sat in the middle of it all, holding a postcard against her chest with both hands as if it might still try to leave. Her grandmother had stood on that platform, had known this woman, had laughed like that here in a town that now only whispered, which meant the bus had never broken down 4 miles from nowhere. It had broken down 4 miles from the smudge on the postcard, 4 miles from the one place on earth her blood had been waiting for her behind a door nobody could open at a table set for 2. Outside, wind moved through the sumac. The old car held it off her the way it had held off 30 years. And on the wall above the desk in the dark, the clock still said 6:15, still waiting, same as everything else in Garnet Hollow, same though she couldn't know it yet, as a woman 2 counties south with a ledger-straight mind and 86 years of patience who had been waiting longest of all. There is a particular kind of quiet that settles over a person who has just learned her whole life has been circling one small dot on a map. Junie Faulkner woke up inside that quiet. Morning came down through 14 arched windows of filthy stained glass, laying little lozenges of red and green and gold across the floorboards, across her blanket, across the shoebox. She had fallen asleep holding the way a child holds a stuffed bear. For a long moment she didn't know where she was. Then she did. Then the whole night arrived in one wave. The photograph, the two laughing women, the broken G. Her grandmother had stood on a platform in this town. Her grandmother had known Opal Deverell, and a bus had quit 4 miles from all of it, and Junie had walked the rest of the way without knowing she was walking home. She lay still and let herself feel it for exactly 11 seconds. Then she got up, because that was the other thing about Junie Faulkner. Wonder was a luxury. Rent came first. Even when rent was a $4 Railcar, rent came first. So she made a list, out loud to the dust being a better listener than most caseworkers she'd known. 1 money, 2 roof leak back corner, 3 stovepipe, 4. She looked at the fold-down table still set for 2, the lidded serving dish sitting at its center like a held breath. 4. Not yet, not yet. Some things you had to earn. Money came first, and money in Garnet Hollow had one address. She walked into the Lucky Spoon at 6 sharp before the regulars, while Bertie Malone was still flipping chairs off tables one-handed with a coffee in the other, and delivered the sentence she'd rehearsed the whole half-mile in. She washed dishes, she didn't break them, she didn't steal, and she didn't need a payroll form with an address on it because she had an address now. It was a Railcar. She'd been told Bertie knew it. Bertie set down a chair, gave her the long look, the one that went through skin, and checked the framing underneath. Dishes, huh? And I fix things, toasters, hinges, that register drawer you keep hitting with your fist. You notice that? Everybody notices that. It's louder than the jukebox. Something happened at the corner of Bertie's mouth, in the same family as a smile, but with harder bark on it. She aimed her coffee cup at the kitchen door. Sinks in the back, aprons on the hook. Shift meal comes with it, and before that, mouth opened again. The shift meal was not charity, it was health code. She couldn't have a girl fainting into her dishwater. Eat first, scrub after, which is how Junie Faulkner got the first job of her life that came with a person attached to it instead of a form. The days found a shape after that, and for a girl who had spent 21 years being poured from one container into another, a shape was a miracle she had no words for. Mornings at the sink steam and clatter Bertie, conducting the breakfast rush like a general with a spatula. Afternoons out at the spur working on the car. Evenings with a kerosene lamp and Opal Deverell's shelf of books, reading the way a starving person eats. And slowly, so slowly, she nearly missed it happening. The town began to arrange itself around her. Amos came most days, never announced, never asked. His truck simply appeared on Tanner Road around 2, and he'd come through the weeds carrying some tool or piece of salvage, and they'd work, mostly in silence, which suited them both. He taught her the roof, how to find a leak by tracing the stain uphill against gravity's lie. He taught her the little cast iron stove, how to coax a draft, how to bank a fire so it met you alive in the morning. I talked to machines more than to people. She learned that fast. He'd lay a hand on a rusted hinge and murmur to it, "Easy now, nobody's rushing you," and the hinge would give every single time, like it had only ever been waiting to be spoken to kindly. Once watching her wrestle a rusted bolt with her whole body and lose, he took the wrench out of her hands, set it down, and handed her the oil can instead. She kept trying to win, he told her. Iron wasn't a fight. Iron was a conversation. You soak. You wait. You ask again, nicer. He tapped the bolt once gently, like knocking at a door. Most stuck things in this world come loose the same way, people included. She wrote that one down, inside the cover of one of Opal's books, in pencil small. It felt like something a grandmother might have said. She was collecting those now, assembling one out of scraps. The town came in scraps too. Lorna Pettis began rounding her purchases down instead of up, aggressively, insultingly down, glaring over the reading glasses in a way that forbade all comment. A folding cot appeared one day, propped against the railcar steps, no note. A kerosene lamp better than her old one arrived the same way a week later. A box of canning jars, a rag rug. Nobody ever confessed to any of it. That was the rule she came to understand. Garnet Hollow's kindness worked like Garnet Hollow's suspicion. It moved at night and it never signed its name. But the whispers hadn't stopped. That was the other thing, because she still caught the name. In the post office line, outside the church with its flat bell, Deverell, said low, said with a little hiss riding the end of it. And now that Junie knew the face that went with the name, now that she'd seen the mended scarf and the ledger-straight desk, every whisper landed on her like a small personal insult. Thief, the town said, took the payroll and ran, left the whole line holding air, except thieves don't set a table for two, except thieves don't mend a scarf in stitches too small for old eyes, except nothing in 60 feet of that woman's careful life said run. Junie kept the argument to herself, for now, 21 years of other people's houses had taught her that you don't correct a family story your first week under their roof, even when the story is wrong, especially then. It was a Thursday evening, 9 days in, when the floor spoke to her. She was sweeping. That was all. Sweeping the back end of the car by lamplight, working the broom into the seam where floorboards met wall, singing to herself badly one of the 3 songs she knew all the words to. And the broom head crossed one particular board. The sound changed. Talk. Every other board said talk solid dense. 30 years of talk. This one said tunk, hollow, for 6 inches. Then talk again. Junie stopped singing. She stood very still in the lamplight, broom in hand, and her heart started its business, and she told it, "It's fine. It's probably nothing. It's a knot in the wood. It's rot. It's all right. We're kneeling now. Apparently, we're kneeling." She knelt, set the lamp on the floor, pressed her palm to the board. It gave a fraction, a soft, deliberate fraction, finished with a click like something well made, acknowledging her. Boards don't do that. Boards nailed down to stay do not do that. Her fingers found the seam, and here was the detail that raised the hair along her arms. The seam was clean, not rotted, not warped, cut. She could feel before she ever saw them the faint, even strokes of a handsaw. Patient strokes, careful strokes, made by somebody who squared her ledgers and mended her scarves, and never in her life did one single thing by accident. The board lifted free like it had been waiting years for exactly this. Beneath it, framed neat between the joists, somebody had built a compartment into the floor of the car itself, lined in oilcloth, dry as the day it closed, and inside the compartment, a metal strongbox army green with a brass lock, a leather satchel stiff with age buckled twice, and a bundle of letters tied in twine so old it crumbled at the knot the instant her finger touched it. 30 years of holding on undone by one warm hand. Junie sat back on her heels and pressed both hands over her mouth, because nobody hides things this carefully by accident. because nobody builds a false floor for junk, because every foster kid on earth knows precisely what a hiding place means. It means somebody owned something precious, and somebody was afraid. Her hands were shaking when she reached for the strong box. It wasn't even locked. The brass lock hung open on its hasp, and she would think about that later, would understand later, that a lock left open is a message. But in that moment, all she saw was what the lid gave up: money. Stacks of it, old bills banded in paper wrappers, browned at the edges, filling half the box in tidy bricks. More money than Junie Faulkner had seen in one place in her life, more than she'd seen in all the places of her life combined. Her breath thinned, her eyes ran the math without permission, hundreds, thousands, and she stopped counting, because counting this felt dangerous. And her first thought, God help her, was, so it's true. So Opal Devereux really had taken the payroll. Here it sat, under the floor. The whole town was right, and the mended scarf was wrong, and no, wait, because packed beside the money, filling the box's other half with the same brick-like order, were books, ledgers, 2 sets bound in different colors, black and oxblood red, and squared exactly on top of them a single sheet in a hand Junie already knew from the desk, upright, precise, no nonsense in it anywhere. Underlined, twice at the top, the sheet said, "If you are reading this, count it. It is all there, every cent. The books will tell you whose it is. It was never mine. It was never theirs either." O.D. Junie read it 3 times. Then she opened the black ledger, and the night got very long. She was no accountant, but she owned a counting mind, an ordering mind, and Opal Devereux had written for exactly that kind of mind, written for a future stranger. Patient columns, plain labels, everything cross-referenced in a system so clear it came out the other side as kindness. Junie followed the numbers by lamplight, page after page, hour after hour, the stove ticking, the wind walking the roof. The black ledger held official record, copied out in Opal's hand and marked "copied true from company books," with dates, land transactions, parcel after parcel, along the spur, purchases, the company buying strips of land outright from local families, tidy sums, signatures, final. The red ledger was something else. The red ledger held the same parcels, same families, same dates, different documents, lease agreements, temporary, 7 years renewable land to revert to its owner when rail operations ended, and clipped into the red ledger's pages, folded with care, rode the leases themselves, originals, real paper, real ink, the true signatures of real families, names Junie now heard every morning across the counter of the Lucky Spoon, names on coffee cups, names on church pews, the same land, sold in one book, only borrowed in the other, which meant somebody had taken a town's worth of temporary handshakes and quietly rewritten them into permanent goodbyes. Families who believed their back 40 was coming home when the train stopped had been recorded officially in ink as having sold it for next to nothing, and somewhere somebody had pocketed the difference between a lease and a theft, and the money in the strong box. Junie went back to Opal's note. It was never mine. It was never theirs either. A third document waited at the bottom, and it explained the bricks of cash, a deposit register, lease deposits, security money paid in by the families themselves, held by the railroad, owed back to them, and beneath it a memo on company letterhead, 30 years old, ordering those deposit accounts consolidated and transferred out ahead of the line's closure, ahead of, in plainer words, the money vanishing along with the paperwork. Opal Deverell had gotten there first. She hadn't stolen a payroll. She had rescued the deposits, withdrawn every cent on her own authority as paymaster's clerk the last night the money was still reachable, and hidden it under her own floor with proof of exactly whose it was and written every penny down. And for that, a town had called her thief for 30 years. Junie sat on the floor at 2 in the morning, ringed by ledgers, and cried, not for 11 seconds, for a while, for a woman she had never met who had set a table for two and squared her books and waited for somebody, anybody to come count the money and believe her. Okay, she said finally out loud, to the car, to the dust, to the clock frozen at 6:15. She dragged the heel of her hand across her face. Okay, I'm counting, Miss Deverell. The letters, the bundle in the crumbling twine, she read last, and they broke her heart in a different direction. Drafts, letters Opal had written and never sent or sent into silence. To the county land office, to a newspaper 2 counties over, to the railroad's own head office. Polite, precise, then less polite, then in the last few something close to pleading, pressed flat under the precision, a woman keeping her voice level inside a burning building. I have originals, I have dates, I ask only that someone compare the records. The families of this town are owed the truth, and I am owed my name, and one letter unsent addressed, unlike all the others. No office, no title, just a name that stopped the breath in Junie's throat. Mavis. If you are reading this, then I finally worked up the nerve to hand it over, or things have gone wrong enough that you found it yourself. Either way, you always said the truth keeps its own books. Well, I kept them. Whatever happens to me, whatever they say about me, you will know where to look. You always know where to look. Come to dinner Friday, 6:15. I'll set the table. Yours in all weather O. 6:15. Junie's eyes traveled slow up the wall, to the dead clock, to the table, to the 2 plates, to the lidded dish. The dinner had been for her grandmother. The dinner that never happened had been laid for Mavis Faulkner. Whatever went wrong in this town 30 years ago went wrong on a Friday sometime before 6:15, in the gap between a set table and a knock that never came, and 2 women who had laughed together on a depot platform never got their supper, and one of them vanished into a lie called thief, and the other somehow, someway ended up gone too, gone far enough that her granddaughter grew up owning nothing of her but a postcard and a smudge. Some things are worth waiting for, baby girl, even me. Junie didn't sleep. At 7 the next morning she stood on the courthouse steps of the county seat with the satchel over her shoulder, waiting for the records office to unlock, holding her coffee like a weapon. The records office of Harlan County was a basement kingdom of paper, and the kingdom had one queen, Rosalind Tuck, 50s, cardigan buttoned to the throat, regardless of season, 15 years cataloging that county's files, and she received every visitor with the wary courtesy of a librarian who has watched too many people shelve books in the wrong place. Junie laid it all out. The car, the floor, the ledgers, the leases. And she watched a professional skeptic's face thaw by degrees as Rosalind turned pages with a cotton glove she'd produced from a drawer, because of course there were cotton gloves in a drawer. If Rosalind began and stopped, turned another page, began again. If, and I do mean if, these originals are genuine, then what you're holding contradicts the recorded conveyances In Book 2, 14 pages 30 through 51, which I could pull in about 4 minutes because I know exactly where they sleep. Her eyes came up over the leases. She wanted to be clear about something. People came down those stairs about once a year with a tale of buried railroad papers. It was always nonsense, a fake, a fantasy, or a family feud wearing a costume. Okay, this is not nonsense, she said it quietly, almost grudgingly, as if the words cost her a deposit of their own. This was a paymaster clerk's documentation. She had read 30 years of this county's paper, and she knew careful when she was holding it. She set the page down with 2 fingers, gently the way you set down something alive. She'd known the name, of course. Everyone her age knew the name. Opal Deverell, the woman who took the wages and ran. Practically a fable in these hills. Mothers had used it on daughters. Mind you don't grow up to be an Opal. She didn't take wages. It came out harder than Junie intended. She took deposits, their deposits, to keep somebody else from taking them first. It's all written down, every cent. Rosalind studied her a long moment over the glasses. How long had Junie known this woman's name? A week, 9 days. And you're already angry on her behalf. 9 days. Something in the archivist's face gave by a degree, maybe 2. Most people who came down those stairs were hunting money. This girl appeared to be hunting justice for a stranger, rarer than original leases, and she'd tell her that for free. She drew her chair to the desk, squared the documents, and became before Junie's eyes a different creature altogether, a hunting creature. Pull that chair around. If they were doing this, they were doing it right, which meant verifying every parcel against the plat books, photographing everything, and touching nothing without gloves. There was a second pair in the drawer. Yes, she kept 2. Don't look at her like that. They worked until the basement windows went dark. Parcel by parcel, lease by lease, Rosalind pulling dusty plat books and tax rolls with the speed of a woman who had memorized a labyrinth, murmuring file numbers under her breath like a rosary. 214, 221, tax roll 89, and parcel by parcel the fraud rose up out of the paper and stood in the room with them. 11 families, 11 pieces of land along the old spur, leased, never sold, recorded as sold. Some of the families long scattered, some still eating breakfast at the Lucky Spoon every morning of their lives, unaware they sat half a mile from proof that their daddy's land had never legally left the family name. Then Rosalind found the signature, late by then. She'd been working through the recorded deeds, the fraudulent ones, checking notarizations, witnessing officers, the company land agent who had shepherded every false conveyance through the county's books, the same name deed after deed. She went still in a way Junie had already learned to read. Paper people go still like that when the paper says something the room isn't ready to hear. What? The land agent of record on all 11. She rotated the deed book slowly and tapped one line, one signature angular and confident, repeated 11 times across 30 pages like a fence line. Every fraudulent conveyance in that stack had been recorded, witnessed, and walked through this courthouse by the railroad's local land agent, a man named Bertram Sturgis. The name meant nothing to Junie. For one whole second, nothing. Sturgis! Rosalind removed her glasses, and her voice dropped into the low, careful register of a woman naming a live wire, as in the father of Harmon Sturgis, who owned Sturgis Stone and Gravel, the largest business left in that end of the county, who employed 60-some people, sponsored the Little League and sat 2 pews from the front at First Methodist. She polished the glasses, replaced them, and whose gravel trucks, she would just mention as a matter of public record, currently ran a long, ugly detour to reach the state route because the straight shot, the old rail corridor, had never been available to him. The basement held its breath. The corridor, Junie said slowly, that runs alongside my land. Alongside it, through it, around it. Rosalind folded her hands. Junie's little strip, the trackbed itself, was the one clean thread in the entire tangle. The railroad had always owned that outright, which was why the county could seize it for taxes and sell it to a girl with $4 free and clear. But the parcels on either side, the ones a haul road would actually require. She rested her palm flat on the stack of leases, 11 families' land, which Harmon Sturgis had spent the last several years quietly acquiring rights across from people who believed because these books told them so that their families had sold it fair and square 30 years ago. And there it was, the whole shape of the thing rising out of a basement full of paper, a father who stole land with a pen, a son building his road on the theft, and one woman's floorboard full of proof that could pull the whole arrangement up like a rotten stump. He doesn't know these exist, the originals. If he did, Rosalind answered, closing the deed book with a sound like a door, I expect that railcar of yours would have burned sometime in the past 30 years. If, and I do mean if I were you, I would be very thoughtful indeed about who watches you come down these stairs. Somebody had been watching. Junie never learned who. A courthouse has eyes, a town has telephones, and news of a girl hauling a leather satchel into the records office 2 days running travels the way news travels, invisibly, efficiently, uphill toward money. Because the following Tuesday, a truck came up Tanner Road that was not Amos's truck. Black, new, clean in the way that cost money weekly. The man who stepped out wore a canvas jacket that had never met canvas work and boots that had never met mud. 50-something, silver at the temples, a smile that arrived a full second ahead of him. So she was the famous $4 girl. He came through the weeds like a man strolling his own driveway and stopped at a courteous distance, running his eyes down the rail car, slow and appraising the way a man prices scrap. Harmon Sturgis, Sturgis stone and gravel. He imagined she'd seen his trucks. Hard not to, they're loud. They are loud. The laugh came easy and generous, a laugh that invited you in and kept track of whether you accepted. Commerce is loud, sweetheart. It's the quiet towns that are dying. The smile swung toward the car. Well, look at the old thing. She'd done work. Roof patch, stovepipe new, real initiative genuinely. Kids her age mostly couldn't patch a phone screen. A slow, admiring shake of the head. Pretty thing, this car. He'd always thought so, even rotting out here. Shame about the upkeep, though. Iron this old was a hole you poured money into, and winters out here. A wince sympathetic factory made. Hard place for a girl alone. Anything could happen and take an hour just getting noticed. He said it kindly. That was the fact about Harmon Sturgis, that Junie filed away inside the first 90 seconds, filed deep in the drawer beside certain foster fathers with certain voices. He never threatened, he complimented, and his compliments carried edges like a whittled stick. He'd come to it then. From inside the jacket, a folded paper offered between 2 fingers. He wanted to buy her out. The car, the strip beneath it, all of it. And because he admired what she'd done, and because, frankly, this town could use a story where somebody like her caught a break. He was going to name a number that would make her knees funny. He named the number, and Junie's knees, God help her, went a little funny because it was more money than she had ever imagined riding under her own name. First and last and deposit money, community college money, never sleep in a bus station, again money, buy a car that runs money, be a normal girl, somewhere warm money, folded in half in the hand of a man whose father's signature sat 11 times in a courthouse basement like 11 knives in a drawer. No rush, he assured her, watching her face with those pleasant, patient mineral eyes. Sleep on it, right in there, matter of fact. A nod at the car, gracious as a bow. But between the two of them, sweetheart papers had a way of getting complicated on land like this. Old titles, old claims, courts, a sigh regretful, fatherly. Be a shame if a girl with her gumption got tangled in something that old and that ugly when she could walk away clean, rich even. The smile again, full wattage. She should think about what walking away clean was worth. He left the paper tucked under a rock by her steps, the way a man leaves a saucer of milk out for a barn cat. 9 days later, the letter came, and it was not friendly, and it did not smell like milk. Registered mail, a law firm's letterhead carrying more partners than the Lucky Spoon had stools, addressed to Miss J. Faulkner, by name, written in that language that is not quite a threat, the way a drawn-back fist is not quite a punch. Questions have arisen regarding the validity of the county's conveyance of Lot 41, chain of title irregularities. Our client reserves all remedies. Strongly advise you retain counsel. A letter built in a laboratory to do exactly one job, to make a person with no lawyer, no money, and no family lie awake at 2 in the morning doing arithmetic with her own fear. It worked. That night was the bad night, the night Junie almost signed. She sat at Opal's desk with the buyout paper flattened in the lamplight, and Sturgis's number glowed there like a lit window in a snowstorm, and everything tired in her, and there was 21 years of tired leaned toward that window. Because who did she think she was? Because this wasn't her fight. It was 30 years old. It belonged to dead people and old ledgers. Because 11 families had survived this long, not knowing, hadn't they? And the money would be gone into lawyers by spring, and she'd be back on a bus, back to $19, back to counting fence posts, except this time she'd have lost the only thing she'd ever, the only place she'd ever stop, breathe, count. She counted the car. It was the only way she knew to hold still. 14 windows, 2 plates, 1 lidded dish patient as scripture, 1 kettle, 1 clock 6:15 forever 6:15, 1 mended scarf, 1 row of dresses like a choir, 1 pen still in its groove on this desk where a careful hand had set it down, expecting to lift it again, 1 photograph of 2 laughing women, one of whom wore Junie's own eyes, 1 letter never delivered, come to dinner Friday, I'll set the table. And Junie sat back in Opal Deverell's chair, in Opal Deverell's lamplight, and heard herself speak out loud to a woman 30 years gone. Yeah, okay, I hear you. Because here was the truth, and the truth kept its own books. Everything Junie Faulkner had ever owned fit in 1 duffel bag, but she carried 1 inheritance. Nobody had managed to lose misplace or transfer between counties, and it was this. She knew exactly what it felt like when the people with the folders and the numbers decided your story for you, decided your worth, decided where you'd go and what you'd be called, and whether anybody would ever check the facts. Nobody had checked the facts for Opal. Somebody was going to now, even if that somebody was 21, washed dishes, and owned 60 feet of iron and a receipt. She folded Sturgis's paper along its crease and set it unsigned in the desk's bottom pigeonhole, not thrown away. She was too honest with herself for that theater, filed, where she could see the temptation and the temptation could see her, and the two of them could keep each other honest. Then, because it was Friday, because it felt suddenly and fiercely like the hour had come, she did the thing she had been earning for 3 weeks. She lit the candle stub in the brass holder. She stood at the table set for 2, and she lifted at last the lid of the serving dish. Not food underneath. Of course, not food, nothing survives 30 years, but her breath caught anyway. Centered exactly in the dish lay a small folded square of linen, a napkin, and pinned to it a brooch. Old gold shaped like a sprig of some flower Junie didn't know. Beneath it a card in that upright hand. For M. It was your mother's. It was always going to be yours. Some things are worth waiting for. Matching words, matching word for word the postcard in the shoebox. One phrase passed between 2 women like a coin, each keeping half. Junie pinned the brooch to her own collar with hands that would not settle, and she left the lid off the dish, and she left the candle burning while she washed the 2 plates 30 years late in water heated on Opal's stove. Somebody had to. Dinner was over. The table could rest. Sturgis did not wait politely. The escalation arrived the way weather arrives, one system at a time. First, the break-in. Junie came home from a dinner shift on a moonless Thursday and knew before she reached the steps, knew from 20 feet out because the door she always latched just so hasp turned to 2 o'clock a habit. A system hung at 4 o'clock. Inside subtle wrongness everywhere. Drawers shut but not squared. Books shelved but not flush. The desk's pigeonholes riffled by someone who had tried competently but not perfectly to riffle them back. They had found nothing because 8 days earlier, at Rosalind's insistence, every original had been photographed twice, and photographs and originals had been split between the courthouse basement's locked archive and a safe deposit box in the county seat under both their names. If Rosalind had pronounced buttoning her cardigan like armor, and she did mean if someone came looking, let them find a girl and her library books. Junie stood in her rifled home, and the fear arrived, real fear, cold and specific. And right behind it, riding its shoulders, came something hotter. They had been inside Opal's car. They had put their gloves and flashlights on Opal's things 30 years after their money and their lies had already taken everything else the woman had. Okay, Junie told the dark, and her voice held level, which surprised her. Okay, now I'm mad. Second came the squeeze, and the squeeze was smarter because the squeeze never touched her at all. Bertie's landlord, who owned half the buildings on Main and carried it, emerged a note held through a Sturgis family holding company, discovered sudden urgent reasons to review the Lucky Spoon's lease. 22 years in that building, never one late payment, and now inspections, paperwork, murmurs about renovation clauses. Bertie said nothing to Junie about any of it. Bertie said everything by way of pie. A slice appeared at the end of Junie's shift, and Bertie settled into the seat across from her, folded her hands, and asked if Junie knew what she did when a man tried to lean on her. What? I feed everybody he's ever wronged at a discount at the same counter till they get to talking to each other. The toughest smile in Harlan County. She'd run a diner 30 years. Did Junie imagine Harmon Sturgis was the first big belt buckle to mistake her for furniture? The pie slid an inch closer. Eat. And then Junie was going to tell her what she found in that floor. All of it. Because whatever it was, it had that man's blood pressure up, and anything that raised that man's blood pressure was something Bertie Malone wanted to invest in. So Junie told her all of it, and watched Bertie Malone, 60-odd years old, take in the part about the leases with her jaw setting harder and harder, then rise without one word, disappear into the back office and return with a yellowed envelope from a locked drawer that clearly held the diner's true treasures. Inside lay a lease, original, her father's name on it, a strip of land behind the diner that Bertie had been told decades ago by a county assessor holding a company deed her daddy had sold outright before she ever took over the business. He swore up and down he never sold. Gravel in her voice now, gravel Junie had never heard there. Went to his grave with people thinking he misremembered his own hand. My daddy, misremembering. She laid the envelope down beside the pie like an offering on an altar. Number 12 sugar. You had 11 families. Now you've got 12. Third and last they went after Amos, and that was the mistake, because pressure only works on people with something left to lose that they haven't already grieved. And Harmon Sturgis, who read men the way Rosalind read Platt books, misread Amos Greeley completely. He sent 2 polite men in clean trucks out to the old mechanic's place to ask friendly questions about his visits to the spur, to mention in passing his pension, his property line, his age, to suggest that a man his age wants peace. Amos appeared at the Railcar the next evening, and Junie knew from the first sight of him coming through the weeds that something had shifted, because for the first time since she'd known him, he came empty-handed. No tool, no salvage, just a man, and behind his eyes, something enormous dragging its chains. He lowered himself onto the iron step, looked at the car a long while. When he finally spoke, he spoke to the door the way he spoke to machines, because that was the only way he knew to say the hard things. Sturgis's boys had come by his place, wanted to remind him he was old, as if his knees didn't handle that every morning free of charge. The ghost of the almost smile surfaced and sank. It wasn't the first time somebody had suggested he keep clear of this car, he said. Just the first time in 30 years anybody figured they needed to say it out loud. Wind moved through the sumac. Junie held very still, the way you hold still while a wild thing decides whether to come closer. He'd been trying to figure how to tell her this since the day the door came open. His thumb worked a spot of rust on the step around and around. Every soul in this town believed that car rusted itself shut when the company pulled out. Act of God. Nobody's doing. The town had told that story so long it had grown moss. The thumb stopped. It wasn't rust that kept this car shut, girl. Not at first. He looked up at her then, 73 years old, and his eyes were a boy's eyes, scared and resolved, walking into the principal's office to confess. It was me. I sealed it. The evening went quiet to its floor. Even the sumac held still. 30 years ago this fall, that Friday, each word came out of him like a bolt breaking loose, one thread tearing at a time. Opal came to the shop at closing. He'd never seen her in such a state. Composed, she was always composed, but white as paper, carrying that little grip she carried. She'd had an accident on the Ridge Road 2 nights before. Brakes. Except her brakes were 4 months old because he had done them himself. His hands closed over his knees. She knew things she told him about the land papers. She'd been making noise in offices, and the noise had come back on her, and now it was leaving town noise. That night noise. She never said who. She didn't have to. There wasn't but one family in that valley with reach like that. She asked him 2 favors, said he was the only man on the line she trusted to do a thing right and keep quiet about it after. His voice sank so low Junie had to lean in. First favor, seal the car. That night, weld the back door, freeze the bars, make it look like time had done it. Make it so nobody got inside. She told him, Amos, everything I am is in that car, and it has to sleep until it's safe to wake up. He'd done the weld in the dark fast by feel, and he had made himself not look inside. Looking felt like trespass. So for 30 years he'd known there was something in there, her whole life in there, and never once known what it looked like. Until a girl with $4 stood next to him while his own flashlight showed him. And when the county went and sold the parcel out from under everything $4 to a girl with no coat, worth the name he'd driven out that first evening, telling himself he'd talk her out of it. Then he'd seen her hands, seen the bent pipe, and figured if that door was coming open, either way, better it come open gentle with him standing there than someday under a scrapper's cutting torch with nobody watching who cared. And the second favor, he reached slow into the chest pocket of his coveralls, the pocket over the heart, and Junie understood with a physical jolt that whatever lived in that pocket had ridden there or somewhere near it for 30 years. She gave me this, an envelope, once white, gone ivory corners, soft, the way Junie's postcard was soft, aged not by weather, but by handling, by being held, by being taken out on winter nights, turned over and put away again. 3 decades of one man's guilt worn into the paper like a patina, sealed, the flap glued, and over the glue a strip of stamp edging, and across the seal in that upright ledger hand words. Junie tilted it to the last light. Do not open, not for the law, not for the company, not for your own peace, Amos Greeley. Open only if Faulkner blood comes back to this town. Junie's hands went cold, then hot, then she couldn't feel them at all. 30 years he'd carried it. His voice cracked down the middle, and he let it crack, too tired to hold anything together anymore. 30 years he'd walked that spur every evening, telling himself he was stretching his legs, checking his weld, standing guard maybe, lying to himself mostly. He looked at the car and his face did what iron does when it finally gives, because here was his sin girl, and he would say it once so she'd know what she was working beside. When the town took up thief, when they took a woman who never misplaced a nickel in her life and turned her into the story mothers scared their daughters with, he'd known better. Maybe not the whole of it, but better. And he'd had a pension coming and a sick wife and a company signing his checks. His jaw worked, so he'd kept his weld shut and kept his mouth the same. I held the envelope out to her on both open palms, an offering, a surrender. He'd never known what Faulkner meant, not for years, just a name on a seal. Then last week Bertie mentioned her name, her whole name, and he'd about driven off the ridge road himself. His hands were steady now, steadier than they'd been all evening. Some stuck things come loose. It was hers, had been hers since before she was born, near enough. He was sorry it had waited on his courage this long. Junie took the envelope. It weighed nothing. It weighed more than the Railcar. Through the paper her fingertips read the shapes inside the way Amos read iron, a small key, old-fashioned, hollow-barreled, something stiff, a card or a photograph, and folded paper, several sheets sealed tight, holding their secrets the way this whole town held everything, tightly, and in the dark. Faulkner blood. Opal Deverell had sealed 60 feet of her life into iron, sworn a good man to silence, and staked all of it, her name, her table set for two, her 30 years on one single hope, that someday, somehow, some Faulkner would come back to Garnet Hollow, and a bus had broken down 4 miles out of town. Junie looked from the envelope to the man who had guarded it, into old age, to the car glowing faintly behind him, stained glass, catching the day's last red coal, 14 windows like 14 watchful eyes. Amos, whatever's in here, it's gonna wake everything up, all of it, the whole 30 years. I know it. He rose off the step, slow joints cracking, settled his cap, and for the first time since she'd met him, he stood fully straight, shoulders back, a tall man, remembering he was tall. High time, too. I'm done oiling that particular silence. He looked once more at his weld, at the seam he'd made, and the seam that had finally rightly been broken, and turned for his truck. His voice drifted back through the weeds, rough and certain. Open it, inside girl, at her desk, by her lamp. Some letters you don't read standing in the yard. Some letters you don't read standing in the yard. So, Junie Faulkner carried the envelope inside the way you carry something breathing. She lit Opal Deverell's lamp. She sat in Opal Deverell's chair at Opal Deverell's desk, with 30 years of a stranger's patience pressed between her two hands. Outside, Amos's truck grumbled off down Tanner Road, and then there was no sound left in the world except the stove ticking and her own heart, which had apparently decided to relocate to her ears. She read the seal one more time. Open only if Faulkner blood comes back to this town. That's me, she whispered, to the car, to the desk, to the clock stopped at 6:15. I came back. I didn't even know I was doing it, but I came back. She opened the envelope. 3 things slid out into the lamplight. The first was a photograph, and it undid her before she'd read a single word. 2 women on a farmhouse porch, older here than in the depot picture wind, in their hair, squinting into sun. Opal on the left, arms crossed, chin up, eternally auditing the horizon, and Mavis Faulkner on the right, holding on her hip a little girl, maybe 3 years old, dark cowlick, stubborn jaw already installed. Junie turned it over. On the back, in Opal's upright hand, M and her girl, the summer she almost stayed. Her girl. Junie touched the little face with one fingertip and thought, hello, mama, and had to lay the photograph face down on the desk because she could not look at it and breathe at the same time. The second thing was a key, small, brass, hollow-barreled, old-fashioned, made for something built before locks got lazy. Tied on with waxed thread, a paper tag, one word, dispatch. The third was the letter, 4 pages, that handwriting like a woman standing at attention. Junie read it twice that night and once more at dawn, and pieces of it stitched themselves into her permanently, the way Scripture does, the way scars do, to whoever carries the Faulkner name. And I pray it is you, and I pray you are reading this in daylight in better times, and that the door gave Amos Greeley less trouble opening than it gave him closing. You will have found the floor by now, if you are your grandmother's blood. Mavis always said, our family can't walk past a loose board to save our lives. The money is not the payroll. Whatever they have told you, whatever song this town has learned to sing about me, it is the deposit money of 11 families, and I removed it from the company's reach. On the last night it was still reachable, because a memo crossed my desk ordering it consolidated and quietly gone. I have spent my working life balancing books. I could not watch that theft and stay balanced, so I committed a smaller wrong to interrupt a larger one, and I have kept a ledger of it to the penny because someday somebody would need to count it, and I did not intend to be found short. They arranged an accident for me on the Ridge Road. I do not use that word carelessly. I am an accountant. I do not estimate. Your grandmother stood up for me in front of the whole church congregation, and this town made her pay for it, and that is the debt I can never balance. If she never told you any of this, forgive her. Some women protect their children with stories. Some protect them with silence. Your grandmother tried both, and neither worked out the way she hoped, and none of it was her fault. The key opens my dispatch box. The box goes where I go. Inside is the last piece, the piece I did not dare leave behind in the car, and without it, the rest is only paper against paper. Come and get it. If I am living, you will find me at the Quintrell Place, 2 counties south off the Millbrook Road. It was my mother's people's land. It is the only ground on this earth that ever kept a promise to me. If I am not living, then look for a stone with no dates on it, because I never could stand for numbers to be wrong, and nobody knows my beginning, and I did not trust them to record my end. Come soon. I am old, and I have been setting a table for 30 years. O.D. Junie lowered the last page. If I am living. The words sat in the lamplight and glowed, because the whole town spoke of Opal Deverell the way you speak of the dead, because 30 years is 30 years, and the woman in the photograph had been 50-something then, which would make her. Junie ran the arithmetic 3 times, disbelieving it each time, a hand returning to a light switch in a power outage. 86. She would be 86. People live to 86. People live to 86 all the time. Junie was out the door before the sun cleared the ridge, running through wet weeds toward town, toward the diner, toward Amos, the letter held against her chest with both arms, the way you hold a child, and behind her, the 14 stained glass windows of the paymaster car burned red and gold like something waking up. Amos drove. He'd taken one look at the letter, at the words, "If I am living," and gone gray, then white, then a strange, furious pink. Then he'd walked to his truck without a word and sat gripping the wheel of the parked vehicle for a full minute, staring through the windshield at 30 years of assumptions. 30 years he managed at last. 30 years he'd walked past that weld every evening, grieving that woman the way a coward grieves, quietly, where it couldn't cost him anything. The engine caught, his jaw set like a rail joint, and she'd maybe been sitting 2 counties south the whole time, waiting on a name. He pulled onto Tanner Road hard enough to spray gravel. Belt on girl. This truck was about to remember what a young engine felt like. 2 counties south meant 90 minutes of ridge and hollow, and Junie spent every one of them failing to sit still, counting mailboxes, counting hawks, rereading the letter until Amos' eyes, never leaving the road, reached over and pressed the pages gently down into her lap, the way he'd quiet a rattling panel. Save it. She'd want her eyes fresh. The Millbrook Road unspooled through October trees, and then a sign floated up out of all that color. White paint, black letters, hand-shaped old. Quintrell House. Residential care. Visitors welcome till sundown. A farmhouse grown large and soft with additions. A porch running the full face of it. Rocking chairs. a maple in the yard burning holy orange, somewhere a wind chime built from old spoons, which Junie would later learn Opal called the least useful instrument ever invented, and also refused to let anyone take down. At the desk inside, a kind-faced attendant looked up. "We're here to see." Junie's voice failed at the fence, then climbed it. "We're here to see Miss Opal, Opal Deverell." The attendant blinked. They had an Opal sure, but honey, it was Quintrell. Miss Opal Quintrell had the corner room going on 15 years now. A small smile. Were they family? She didn't get family. Junie opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, and what came out came from somewhere well below thinking. Yes, she's been expecting me for about 30 years. They walked a hallway that smelled of lemon and radiators, past a den where a television murmured to itself, to a corner room at the end door half open, afternoon light pouring through onto the hall floor like something spilled and golden. The attendant knocked. "Miss Opal, visitors," and a voice came back, dry, precise, every consonant squared and filed. "Unless it's the man about the porch railing, tell them I gave at the office. I gave everything at the office. It's rather the theme of my life." Junie stepped into the doorway. The room was small and ruthlessly neat. Books in ranked rows, a bed with corners you could grade, an old railroad dispatch box on the dresser, brass-cornered, keyhole gleaming dusted daily for decades, and in a wheelchair by the window in the full gold of the falling light sat a small, straight-backed woman with white hair pinned like a decision and a face Junie knew. Older, carved down to its essentials, but the same chin, the same eyes that audited the world. 86 years old, alive, 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 alive. Opal Deverell looked at the girl in the doorway, and her face, which had spent 3 decades giving away exactly nothing, did something slow and seismic. Her eyes went to Junie's jaw, her cowlick, her stubborn way of standing half-turned, ready to run, choosing not to. The old woman's hands closed over the arms of the chair. "Well," she breathed, and all the dryness cracked off the word like paint off a door. "Kept your own schedule getting here, didn't you?" Her chin trembled once. She disciplined it. It disobeyed. "You're hers. Don't bother confirming it. I've balanced enough books to know when a line comes out true. You're Mavis Faulkner's blood, or I have never counted anything in my life." "Junie," it came out of a throat full of gravel. "Junie Faulkner, my mama was." "Show me your hands." A command. Junie crossed the room and held them out, split knuckles and all, and Opal took them in both of hers, papery and strong, turning them over like documents. Working hands, counting hands, a callus there that said needle and thread. She looked up, and 86 years of waiting stood in her eyes with its hat in its hands. Her girl's girl, come at last. She'd get up, but her knees had resigned in 98, and the pension was insulting. Junie laughed, and then horrifyingly the laugh turned into the other thing, the thing she gave 11 seconds. Except this time, the count broke. This time, it simply came, and she went down on her knees beside the wheelchair, the way you kneel at an altar. And Opal Deverell, thief of Garnet Hollow, laid a hand on the back of her head like a benediction and let her stay there. By the door, Amos Greeley stood holding his cap against his chest, in both hands, tears running open and unashamed down. 73 years of face, saying the one word over and over, quiet as a pendulum. Sorry, sorry, sorry. Opal considered him a long moment across the room. Amos Greeley, still apologizing at machines I see. her voice gentled by 1 degree, which from her was an embrace. Your weld held 30 years old, man. That's the finest work either of us ever did. Now stop leaking on my carpet and sit down. We have accounts to settle. They talked until the light left the maple. Or Opal talked, ledger straight, unhurried, terrible. Junie and Amos listened, the way you listen to a will being read. The accident first. Brakes Amos had rebuilt with his own hands, failing on the ridge road 2 nights before that Friday. The long slide, the tree that caught her instead of the drop, and the visit afterward in a hospital hallway, a company man with a soft voice. So sorry. Roads this time of year. A woman ought to be careful. A woman ought really to consider whether this county agreed with her health. She had been 56 years old, she said, and she understood arithmetic. The next accident wouldn't have a tree in it. So, the last night, the table set for Mavis because Opal had resolved to tell her everything and put the letter and the proof into her hands in case. And then a boy from the depot came running at 5:30 with word that men were asking after her at the boarding house. That night, that hour, 45 minutes, that was what her whole life came down to. She took the dispatch box and the little grip and left the candle burning and the supper covered, because a set table looks like a woman coming back, and a woman coming back is a woman nobody chases. She'd left the lock open on the strongbox on purpose. Her hands were folded, now steady. A locked box says thief. An open box with a ledger sitting on top says witness. She had been writing to the future. Did they understand? It was the only mail service they couldn't intercept. Then Mavis, and here Opal's voice, which had marched level through staged accidents and midnight flights, finally slowed the way a river slows where it deepens. Junie's grandmother had stood up in the Methodist church in front of God and the deacons and every family on that line and said, Opal Deverell has never stolen so much as a stamp, and you all know it, and shame on this whole valley. 16 words. Opal had kept them by heart for 30 years. A pause. The spoon chime spoke softly outside. 16 words had cost Mavis everything. Her cleaning contracts dried up inside a month. Her landlord discovered paperwork problems. Her own church made her invisible in that special Sunday way. And her daughter. A careful breath. Junie's mother had been 17 and furious at the whole world the way 17 is, and she blamed her mama for choosing a scandal over a family. Words got said in that little house that don't unsay. Her mother went north with the first boy who had a car, and Mavis came south, to Opal, to this porch. Junie sat very still. The postcard, some things are worth waiting for. She mailed 100 of them, child. Cards, letters, every month north to every address she could hunt up. For years. A beat, and Opal's eyes softened toward the shoebox shape of memory. The very first one, the depot picture Mavis had mailed from the depot window itself in those last weeks before she left town, back when she still believed the trouble would blow over. That one got through. The rest went from down here, and the rest came home. She turned her chair wheels, whispering toward the closet, and lifted her chin at a shelf, and Junie brought down what sat there. A shoebox. An actual shoebox. Tied in string. Junie's hands began to shake before she read the top envelope because she knew she already knew, and there it was. Return to sender. Stamped red. Over and over, envelope after envelope. Years of a mother's handwriting coming home unopened until the last few, which carried no stamps at all, which had simply never been mailed, because even hope keeps books, and eventually the account runs dry. Junie thought of 14 sealed letters in a plastic grocery bag 3 feet from where she slept every night, unopened for 10 years, because opening them made it final, because paper was the last place her mother's voice lived, and Junie had been saving it the way you save the last of anything. 2 shoe boxes, 2 stubborn women, one family folding its silence like linen generation after generation, everyone protecting everyone straight into the ground. Mavis had waited on this porch 15 years, Opal said quietly. Died in the corner room, the one Opal kept now. She'd taken it after. It got the morning sun, and it had gotten Mavis's ghost, and Opal had wanted both. The chin lifted, ledger straight to the end. In her last week, Mavis had asked to hear the postcard, words read back. Some things are worth waiting for, and she'd said, Opal, write that down for whoever comes. Somebody's coming. My blood is stubborn and somebody is coming. She was not a woman you argued with. So Opal had put it on a card under a dish lid and set the table one last time and told Amos Greeley to weld the door. The room went gold, then amber, then gray. She was right, you know. Opal reached out and laid one hand along Junie's cheek, light as a leaf. Took the scenic route. But here you sit, now. The hand withdrew. The dryness came back up like a shopkeeper's shutter, though the eyes behind it were shining. Enough weather. Bring me that box, girl. You've got my key, I expect, and I have kept the books waiting long enough. The dispatch box opened with a click, like a held breath released. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay a single-bound volume, marbled cover, company stamp, the signature register division office. Every employee, every landowner, every soul who had ever signed railroad paper on that line had signed this book first in person before a clerk as a specimen, the one true record of 11 families' honest hands. Paper against paper, Opal explained, was a quarrel. Paper against this was a verdict. Bertram Sturgis had forged 11 families onto 11 deeds, and he'd forged them from memory, and memory is a sloppy clerk. One finger tapped the cover. Any document examiner in the state could lay his fakes beside these true hands and finish the job in an afternoon. She had waited 30 years to make a gift of that afternoon. The finger lifted and aimed at Junie like an auditor's pen, but Junie would carry it, not her. Understand this clearly, child. This was Junie's fight now. Opal was the evidence. Junie was the case. A town won't hear it from the thief. It'll hear it from the girl who paid $4 and did what nobody else had the nerve to do in 30 years, which was look. What happened over the next 3 weeks, Garnet Hollow still talks about. Junie found the lawyer first. Elias Redpath, 34 one-room office over the pharmacy in the county seat, a man who took the cases the marble lobby firms wouldn't touch, which kept him permanently broke and permanently unafraid, a rare and useful combination. He read the ledgers in one sitting, read Opal's letter twice, stood up, sat back down, and looked at Junie across the desk with his tie already loosening itself. Here's what they do, he said, counting it off on 3 fingers, which Junie would learn was simply how the man breathed. Question, the paper question, the woman question her. Forged, senile drifter. That was their whole hymnal 3 verses. The fingers closed into a fist gently, like a door shutting. And here's what we do. Authenticate, corroborate, publicize. They wanted this quiet, dark, and private, so we would be loud, documented, and extremely public. Sunlight, Miss Faulkner, is cheaper than litigation and twice as fatal. The Sturgis firm requested a closed meeting within the week. Confidential. All parties. Resolution-minded. Elias wrote back one paragraph, declining and scheduled instead a public presentation before the county commission records. Custodian present floor. Open press invited and faxed a copy of his letter to both newspapers himself, whistling. Then the evidence began to gather, and it gathered the way a storm gathers, from every direction at once. Rosalind spent 4 evenings in the basement building, the paper spine, certified copies, in acid-free folders, plat maps, flagged a chain of custody log, so meticulous. Elias read it and whistled a second time. Amos drove out to 2 other counties and came back with 2 old railmen, retired crew, who had worked the line in those last years, and both signed sworn statements, one at his own kitchen table with his wife's hand on his shoulder, that Opal Deverell's noise-making about land papers had started months before she vanished, and that the company had begun quietly poisoning her name well ahead of any missing money. Lorna Pettis produced from a hardware store, safe older than the town's charter, a stack of receipts proving decades of lease payments on parcels the deeds claimed were long sold. The pieces came out of drawers and safes and Bibles and kitchen tins, 30 years of scattered fragments walking toward one another, and at the center of it all, a girl at a sink, counting exhibits at night to fall asleep. 39, 40, 41. Then came the gathering nobody plan. Bertie's doing executed the way Bertie executed everything, with a counter, a coffee pot, and a total disregard for anyone's permission. Word went out quiet kitchen to kitchen, and on a Sunday evening after close, the lucky spoon filled with the families. The 11, plus Bertie's own lease, made 12. Old men who'd farmed those parcels as boys, a retired school teacher whose mother had cried over that land every Easter, 2 widows, a nurse who drove in from 3 towns over because her granddaddy's name sat on lease number 6, Rosalind at the end of the counter with folders and cotton gloves for anyone who reached without asking. Junie stood in front of them all with her heart in her ears and laid it out, the floor, the books, the forged deeds and the true leases, the deposits intact to the penny, the living woman 2 counties south who had guarded their money's honor for 30 years and been called a thief for her trouble. Silence after, long, the heater fan, the coffee maker sighing. Then old Emmett Dawes, 80 lease number 2, rose up on his 2 canes, and his voice came out rusted and dead level. His daddy went to his grave shamed, thinking he'd signed away the home place and been too foolish to remember doing it. The canes trembled. The voice didn't. Was she telling him his name was forged? Was she telling him the woman they all spat on had been guarding his deposit money like a bank the whole while? Yes, sir, to the penny. Emmett Dawes looked around that diner at his neighbors, at 60 years of shared pews and shared silences. Then he allowed that he didn't know about the rest of them, but he had an apology to make that was 30 years past due, and by God, he intended to still be breathing when he made it. The hearing was set for a Thursday, 7 o'clock, in the big meeting room at the county building, and by 6:40, the room had run out of chairs, and by 6:50, it had run out of wall. Junie stood at the front table in her one good shirt with Opal's brooch pinned at the collar, counting to keep her hands still. Folders 9, exhibits 41, reporters 4, which was 3 more than the county had drawn to any meeting since the flood. Elias beside her, Ty, straight for once, arranging documents in threes. Rosalind at the records table with the plat books buttoned to the collar, wearing the expression of a woman who had waited 15 years for paper to matter this much. Bertie in the front row, arms crossed, flanked by the families like a hen with 12 grown chicks. Lorna by the door, reading glasses down, missing nothing. And across the aisle, Harmon Sturgis, silver-pressed, relaxed, flanked by 3 lawyers whose suits cost more than the Railcar's whole spur, wearing the easy smile of a man who had never once lost anything in this building. He caught Junie's eye across the room, nodded, warm, almost proud of her. She made herself nod back, because you don't flinch first, because 21 years of rooms had taught her at least that much. Elias presented for 40 minutes, clean and brutal, 3 by 3 by 3, the original leases, the recorded deeds, the 11 contradictions. Rosalind called up, walked the room through the county's own books in her precise if and I do mean if voice, and you could feel the floor tilt as it dawned on people that the fraud hadn't been hiding in some far-off company vault. It had been sleeping downstairs, in the basement, under their feet, all along. Then the Sturgis lawyers took their turn, and they sang the hymnal exactly as promised. Forged, verse 1, remarkable documents, decades old, surfacing from a floor. No chain of custody worth the name. Anyone might have manufactured them. Senile, verse 2, delivered delicately with sorrowing faces. The alleged author of these materials, if living, would be of very advanced age, and her reliability, her memory, her state of mind. Drifter, verse 3, and this one, Harmon Sturgis, delivered himself, rising, buttoning his jacket more in sadness than in anger, a reasonable man, merely reasoning. He'd lived here all his life, folks. His daddy helped build half this county. A pause, humble, weaponized, and he just gently asked them all to consider the source. A young lady they'd known 6 weeks, no family anyone could name, no roots, blew in on a broke-down bus, bought a scrap car for $4, and now stood there asking them to tear up 30 years of settled records, unsettle a dozen deeds, and blacken a dead man's name, his father's name. The voice thickened right on schedule. He understood hard times made people creative. He did. But this county ran on the papers in that basement. Start letting anybody with a sad story rewrite them, and none of them owned anything by morning. Murmurs, the room tilting. Junie felt it tilt, felt the old familiar words landing where they'd been aimed. No family, no roots, nobody. She had heard those words in one form or another her whole life, from clipboards, from caseworkers, from the state itself, and they had always worked. Elias leaned in, mouth barely moving. Now, Miss Faulkner. Exhibit 42. Junie stood. The noise dropped, curious. She set both hands flat on the table because her hands were shaking and the table wasn't, and she borrowed its stillness. Old trick. Iron is a conversation. Mr. Sturgis is right about one thing. You've known me 6 weeks. Her voice came out low, and the room leaned toward it, and she let them lean. So don't take my word. Take the math. A nod to the deputy at the side door. The county treasurer had taken custody of a strong box that morning. Sealed, witnessed, photographed. Inside sat what this town had called the stolen payroll for 30 years. It had now been counted by 3 officials in front of 2 reporters. She lifted a single page. It is not payroll. It is the lease deposit money of the 11 families named in these documents, plus Malone, and, per the ledger found with it, the sum comes out true to the amount recorded, to the penny, to the penny. She looked up. Thieves, in my experience, do not balance their books, seal their crime under a floor with a full confession of everyone else's, and leave the lock open. Bookkeepers do that. Witnesses do that. You could have heard dust settle. You want to talk about sources. Her heart was slamming, and her voice somehow was not. Fine, here's my source, the division signature register. Rosalind lifted it gloved, like the host at communion. 11 families signed that book with their true hands before a clerk, before any of this happened. My attorney has formally requested that a state document examiner compare those true signatures against the signatures on the recorded deeds, publicly, on the record. She turned for the first time to face Harmon Sturgis directly. You keep saying forged, sir. So do we. The only question left is which papers, and whose pen, and that's not a question for charm. That's a question for a microscope. You should want that examination more than anybody in this room, unless. She let the word stand there. Unless, all by itself in the middle of the county building, wearing its Sunday clothes. Harmon Sturgis's smile stayed on his face, but something behind it left the building, and that is when the doors at the back of the room opened. Later people told it different ways. Some swore the room went silent all at once. It didn't. It went silent in rings back rows first, like water stilling outward, as heads turned one after another toward the sound of rubber wheels on old floorboards. Amos Greeley came through the doors pushing a wheelchair, moving at his forever pace, unhurried, certain, and in the chair in her good gray dress, white hair pinned like a verdict spine, straight as a rail dispatch box on her lap, sat a small old woman with auditing eyes. She let them look. She had waited 30 years. She could wait 10 more seconds. Emmett Dawes recognized her first. The cane scraped. He was standing before. He had decided to the way you stand when a hymn starts. The widow beside him rose, then Birdie, jaw-tight eyes flooding, then a chair scraped somewhere in the middle, and another, no announcement, no instruction, just a room full of people finding their feet in ragged spreading silence. For a woman their whole town had spent 30 years teaching its children to despise. Junie stood at the front table with her hand pressed over the brooch and watched Garnet Hollow rise for Opal Deverell. The wheelchair came to rest at the front. Opal surveyed the room, commissioners, lawyers, families, with the unhurried thoroughness of a woman checking a long column of figures. Well, she spoke at last into the ringing quiet, every consonant squared. Meetings running long. Some things haven't changed. A ripple of helpless, tearful laughter broke across the room, and she waited it out dry as October. She'd be brief. Her name was Opal Deverell. For 11 years she had kept the pay books of that division, and in all that time she had never lost so much as a penny. The pause of a master bookkeeper ruling a line. Only a reputation, and I have come at last to collect it. She laid one hand flat on the dispatch box. Everything this young woman had told them was true, and she could prove every word, and she intended to for as long as her lungs cooperated, which her doctor assured her was annoyingly indefinite. Her eyes found Harmon Sturgis and held him gently, terribly, the way a ledger holds a debt. She had known his father better than he did, she expected. She had watched him sign other men's names with a steady hand and sleep fine after. She didn't hold a son to his father's account. That was poor bookkeeping, a beat. But the account is due all the same, and I am done carrying it. Harmon Sturgis looked at the old woman, at the register, at the reporter's writing, at 12 families on their feet, at the girl at the front table who would not stop standing there being right, and the smile finally fully went out, like a sign switching off at closing time. There was no thunderclap. That is not how men like that lose. His lead lawyer leaned in and whispered. Sturgis listened, staring into the middle distance, doing his own math. At last the math of examiners and depositions and every rail-adjacent easement his company owned being held up one by one to the light. Then he gathered his folder, murmured something to the commissioners about reviewing the materials, and walked out past the standing families who did not sit down and did not stop him and did not have to. Within the week, his attorneys withdrew the challenge to Lot 41 in a 2-paragraph letter that used the word inadvertent twice. Within the month, the county prodded by 4 newspapers and 1 ferocious archivist open formal review of every parcel along the old spur. The state examiner's report, when it came, ran 40 pages and could be summarized in 1 sentence, which the county weekly happily provided. The deeds are forged, the leases are real. The bookkeeper was honest. The bookkeeper was honest. 30 years, $4 in 1 loose floorboard, and it fit on half a headline. The deposits went home on a Saturday in December at the Lucky Spoon because Birdie declared that money this overdue would not be handed back in any government hallway. It would be handed back with pie. Junie stood by the register and watched it happen, watched the treasurer call names, watched checks pass into hands that had waited so long they'd forgotten they were waiting, watched Emmett Dawes hold his father's return deposit, weep without shame into his coffee, then stump over on his 2 canes to where Opal sat, parked at the head of the counter like visiting royalty, and take her hand and say the words, slow, formal, 30 years in the making. I had called her a thief, in his own kitchen in front of his children, more years than he cared to count. He was wrong and he was sorry and he was grateful and he didn't deserve that she should ever forgive it. Opal looked up at him and Junie watched her do the thing she did, the swift interior arithmetic, and then closed the book. Emmett Dawes, I have carried heavier things than your opinion. Sit down and eat your pie. A pause 1 degree gentler. But your father's account is settled. Tell your children that part too. 2 of the oldest families got their land back, first before spring deeds corrected in the same basement where the fraud had slept, Rosalind Tuck, stamping the corrections personally with what witnesses described as excessive force and visible joy. The Dawes place, the Holloway 40, old men walking property lines they'd been born inside of, laying hands on fence posts like the shoulders of returning sons. The county held its formal apology in April in the same big meeting room. They offered to name it for her. Opal declined. Buildings, she said, were a foolish way to store a name. She had a better bank in mind, and when she said it, she looked directly at Junie. Opal came home in May, not on the Rest Home's van schedule, not for a visit. Home. Birdie cleared out the sunny back room above the diner, the one with the good morning light, and a certain amount of quiet conspiring occurred among certain women of the town, and one afternoon the whole arrangement was simply presented to Opal as a fact, the way Birdie presented food, immune to argument. Opal argued anyway, on principle for 11 minutes. then she moved in. But on Fridays, Amos's truck came out Tanner Road at 5:45, easing over the ruts like he was hauling eggs, and he pushed the wheelchair through the weeds along the plank path Junie had laid, and Opal Deverell came home to the paymaster car. The first Friday was the one nobody who witnessed it will forget. Junie had spent 3 days getting it right, the stove warm, the lamps lit, all of them, so the stained glass poured its colors backward out into the dusk. 14 windows blazing red and green and gold across the spur where anyone on Tanner Road could see them. A lantern the size of a rail car, the table unfolded and laid with the 2 enamel plates, the 2 cups, the candle in the brass holder, new wax on old flame, a table set for 2, 30 years and some months late. Opal's wheels crossed the threshold. Amos had once welded shut, and she stopped just inside, and for a long time she said nothing at all. Her eyes went shelf to shelf, dress to dress, book to book, needle still parked in its spool, pen still in its groove. Her whole careful life kept dusted, honored waiting. At the wall of photographs her breath left her in one long unsteady thread. You kept it all. It kept me first, Junie answered. Seemed fair. They ate at 6:15, Birdie's chicken and Birdie's biscuits and pie, sent along with written instructions, and Opal told stories, and this was the treasure Junie had never seen coming, because Opal had known her mother, known her as a little girl on the depot platform, a dark-haired hurricane in Sunday shoes, told about the day she reorganized the station master's stamps by color and then defended the decision to his face, told about her singing off-key and unstoppable, the same 3 songs over and over. And Junie sat with her fork suspended in mid-air, tears running, laughing, saying, I do that. I count things and I sing those, I do that too, and discovering bite by bite, story by story, that she had never been half as alone as her paperwork claimed. After the plates were cleared, Opal wheeled herself to the desk and looked up at the regulator clock. 6:15, said the dead hands. Faithful as iron. Amos Greeley. She said it without turning. 30 years ago she had asked him to stop this car like a heart. Best weld of his life, he told her once. Second best, ma'am. He was already reaching for the clock case. First best is whatever I do next. He opened the glass, found the key on its hook inside where careful hands leave keys, wound the movement slow, the ratchet ticking like something clearing its throat after long disuse. Then he touched the pendulum once the way he touched all machines, gently, like waking a sleeper who has earned the rest, and the clock started. Tick, after 30 years, talk, as if no time at all. The sound dropped into the lamp-lit car and filled it to the stained glass, and the 3 of them sat listening, the way you listen to a pulse come back. Some things are worth waiting for, Opal said quietly. To the room, to the photographs, to a woman on a farmhouse porch, a long time gone, even me. If you drive out past Tanner Road today, you'll find the weeds cut back and a gravel path laid neat, and 60 feet of railcar painted deep green with its stained glass catching the light, and a covered porch along the side that Amos built and pretends he didn't, and a hand-lettered sign that Lorna Pettis charged exactly $1 to make. The paymaster's porch, repairs and mending, honest work, honest count. Junie fixes what the town brings her. Toasters, hinges, hems, bicycle chains, and the diner's register drawer, finally permanently, to Birdie's loud and theatrical grief, because hitting it had become tradition. She charges fair and keeps a ledger, ox blood red, every penny true, because some inheritances you spend and some you keep in practice. Inside on the wall above the desk, two framed photographs hang side by side where the afternoon light finds them. Two women laughing on a depot platform, two women squinting on a farmhouse porch, a small dark-haired girl on one hip. Beneath them on a card in careful handwriting, the short version Junie gives customers who ask. One kept the books, one kept the faith. The Russ kept everything else until somebody finally looked. And on Sunday evenings, when the workshop lamp is the only light along that whole stretch of the old spur, Junie takes down the shoebox. She reads one letter a week, just one, her mother's handwriting, 10 years, sealed one envelope at a time, out loud at the table set for two, with Opal parked across from her, sipping tea, eyes closed, listening, adding sometimes a story from before, a correction, a laugh, a name. 14 letters, 14 weeks, her mother's voice returning to the world a little at a time, the way spring does, the way trust does. In the third one near the bottom, in ink gone soft with age, was a line Junie now keeps taped inside the desk drawer. If you ever find where Grandma's postcard came from, baby girl, go. Knock. I never had the courage. I'm sorry. You were always braver than me. She had gone. She had knocked. Well, she had raised two fingers in an auction house which came to the same thing, because $4 was never the price of a rail car. Junie understands that now, evenings on the porch, listening to a clock that runs and a wind that can't get in. $4 was the price of a seat at a table that had been set for her since before she was born, the price of a name coming home, the price of learning that all along all those years, in all those houses that were never hers, somewhere down a gravel road, at the end of a dead spur behind a door no one could open, somebody had been waiting, and the light through those 14 little windows burns red and green and gold over the old track every single night, all the way down to the trees, like a promise, like a welcome, like a lamp left on for family running late.